Okay. So your
Um,
concerns about
so,
having a vision in terms of an empathy circle
right.
or sort of empathy circle.
Yeah, you were saying that the thing that you add in the restorative empathy circle is a clear statement of intent that our intent is to create a culture of empathy. Right? Is that
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
That's the purpose of the circle, is to create a culture of empathy within the group of people. Or you said create a family feeling or something like that.
Within a
Yeah.
family-based empathy
Okay.
circle. Yeah.
Okay. So, first I wanted to say that in restorative circles, as Dominic Barter teaches it, there is a specific purpose, which is to restore trust and dignity within the group.
Uh-huh.
That is the purpose, and to repair harm. Uh, uh, so it isn't that there isn't a purpose. That is the purpose. Um, and the second thing I would say about creating a culture of empathy. So I guess the little concern that I have about using that as an objective is that cultures can be oppressive. So if I say, so, and I'm thinking this through as I'm saying it, maybe anything can be oppressive, but if I say, we're creating a culture, we're going to have a culture of empathy in this family, that's our purpose. And then it's kind of like, if I'm not feeling empathic, then I'm not okay, and so you kind of get coerced into being empathic, or pretending that you're feeling empathic, because that is the culture. That's that's the rule of the way we behave. And I think
Terror of
I
empathy.
yeah, and I think while the practice of the empathy circle helps create a culture of empathy. In other words, if people participated and they actually do that process, they probably actually will wind up feeling empathic towards each other. Um, to say that a requirement of the circle is that we listen empathically to each other, I don't think you can say that. um, or I don't know. So I question that. I question whether you can demand that people be empathic.
How about the difference between an intention and a demand? It's like, well, we have the intention. Our intention is, and does everybody agree towards that, having that intention to work towards?
Yeah. So would you say that someone that doesn't have the intention of being empathic is not welcome in the circle?
Well, I would say that that's kind of, it's not that they don't have, they just have to they have to have the intention. If they don't have that intention, then yeah, it would be, I mean, there's sort of the practice that if they don't want to do the practice, there's not a lot of use in doing it. For example, my sister-in-law, we had we were having a discussion about creating this video with my brother. The whole thing kind of fell apart, and I said, well, we need use empathic listening to, unravel this. And then we started, and then she got mad about me choosing my brother to listen, to have him listen to me, not her, because she said, I'm the one in pain. I need to be, the one to be talked to and stuff. And then she just stopped using the the empathic listening, process. And it was just like free for all. Whoever can kind of scream and yell the loudest or be most demanding kind of gets the attention. And I said, well, I'm not willing to continue this dialogue unless it's an empathy. We use the empathic listening process, and I guess I have to go. And then it was like, it brought her around eventually. You know, it took a few steps, but then she went back into the process. And I said, I don't want to continue with this free for all with, you know, screaming and yelling and, you know, interrupting and stuff. I don't want to be part of it. So,
Right.
so I just insisted that that was the process that we use, and because it's worked and in the past, and, you know, so I guess there's that part that, yeah, then I won't take part. Yeah, Carolina.
Yeah.
But I think that what you both are discussing now, it's very, very delicate, very subtle thing. It's very easy to create a totalitarian system of empathy. We have to be careful. Many beautiful ideas became a canvas, a base for totalitarian systems, including Christianity. And I can imagine the totalitarian system which has on his flags and in constitution empathy. I can imagine that very easily. So the thing is, what kind of process may protect us from it?
So
to make it too much institutional, to make it too much formal, to make it a process, not the institution, kind of. I don't know how to.
Yeah, and I have two very clear ideas about that. So one is that what you call it, in other words, insisting on calling it the same thing all the time, as opposed to recognizing a process that has certain attributes and being willing to call it different things or let people call it different things, is part of what releases or undermines that totalitarian thing. So it's kind of like you were just describing, Edwin, where you were saying to her, you know, well, I want to use the empathy process. And she says, fuck that. I just realized we're recording this. I don't want to use that. I'm not going to use that process. Okay. But then you say, well, but I'm not, yelling at each other and interrupting each other and talking over each other, that's not working for me. We're not getting anywhere, and I don't feel understood. So I'm not going to participate in it. So when you give that explanation, you're no longer insisting we have to do the empathy circle. You're just saying this thing that we're doing now, which is not listening to each other and talking over each other, interrupting and arguing, that's not really working. How about if we listen to each other? How about if we go back to taking turns and trying to hear each other? Now, you may have called it empathy circle process again, and she had been willing to say, yes, okay, I'll do that again. But my point is, you pointed to the specifics of why something doesn't work and asked to call in attributes that do work, not just calling it a certain thing, like saying we have to do empathy. And so then you either have to agree or disagree with that. The other thing I'll say is what you were talking about earlier, Carolina, which is looking for those same principles, the empathy circle, culture of empathy principles, or the practice of empathy, those principles and practices that are present in other cultural things or other cultural practices. It's like Karen Armstrong and the Charter for Compassion saying, let's look in all the different world religions for where compassion lies and ask the scholars in those religions to bring that aspect of their teachings forward to create a more compassionate world, rather than inventing a new thing called the compassionate world and insisting that everybody adopt that. So I think, to me, that is one of the secrets of getting, and I'm not, I just wanted to be clear, Edwin, I'm not arguing we shouldn't create a thing called culture of empathy, and that that isn't a good pursuit to pursue building a culture of empathy. I think that's totally a good idea. I just think one of the elements of it is that we should be willing to look for those things in other cultures and acknowledge them and bring them forward, and not just say whatever we define as a culture of empathy, you know, expecting that everyone in the world is going to adopt that, and that that's how it's going to grow. So it's kind of I was kind of long-winded there. Sorry.
I totally agree with that. That was one of my concerns lately. I was thinking, gosh, do we try to invent, are we another bunch of people who try to invent a new thing? There is enough new things in this world, and everybody wants to invent something new. Who will execute all those things, all those inventions, no matter technical or social or psychological, whatever? We should start, execute, utilize what already is. Of course, we can express that different way, but just let's try incorporate what already exists. And actually, I believe, Edwin, you are doing it. All those interviews you are doing is sort of learning from all the people, kind of trying find everything that is coherent with your point of view. So I prefer the idea of discovering what already exists.
Well, what does that mean? Like, I would say there's something about innovation too, right? It's like, as human beings, we're constantly, you know, adapting to the new environment and innovating new things, you know, new ways. So we're sort of, while you know, empathy is just the core human kind of a process, there's still this aspect of creating new terminology, new mental models, new frameworks for sort of adapting to our, you know, our ongoing, you know, human contexts. I don't know if that makes sense, but for example, there's this term social justice has been around a long time, right? It's like everybody's talking about social justice. For me, the social justice is not an effective, for me, it doesn't go deep enough. It doesn't get to the deeper kind of human aspects that empathy does. And so I think there's a need for a new vocabulary, a new term to organize around. And it's this mutual empathy I just see as these mediations is like the model of it. It's like you just get people together, you have them empathize with each other. It taps into a deeper level of our common humanity, and these problems kind of get, you know, resolved, versus the whole social justice, you know, process of building on, you know, justice with its, you know, it's kind of based on certain premises of individuality, you know, personal responsibility, of competition to come to the truth, to retribution and punishment to, you know, heal harm, and external judgment, right? And so, and kind of universal laws, rules, versus, you know, what empathy is, I think, is about this relationship, seeing the relationship, seeing the context that something happens in, having everyone be involved in the empathic dialogue to you know, if this connection happens, that, you know, you have a process for reestablishing connection and trust. And so I think this is like a deeper kind of a model, and it's more effective than what's been happening with the justice, let alone the whole social justice warrior kind of stuff that's been happening, which has, some authoritarian qualities to it, that, having a different vocabulary, a different term to sort of organize around is very helpful.
So I think the argument that I'm making, so I hear what you're saying, and I wouldn't say no to it, I'd say yes to it. So I've been making some notes as we've been talking. So one of the notes I just made, and actually I pasted them in the chat. One of the notes I just made is not only one approach, use all approaches. So it's not as though what you just described is something we shouldn't do. I think we should do that. And what I was suggesting also is a good approach. So not just one approach, but many approaches. And what I was suggesting that's related to what you just said is that rather than telling social justice folks, the people who are identified with that and are in that culture of social justice work, rather than telling them, social justice is not really that effective, here's another model, it's much more effective, it's deeper, and you get better results. Rather than doing that, the idea is you look into the social justice culture and you find the elements of it that actually do value understanding and empathy, or empathic values or empathic practices. And you bring those forward. You talk to them about those elements of their culture, or the people that are part of that culture that are doing that kind of work, that more emphasize compassion and empathy. And you talk about the effectiveness of that and the history of that, and you try to bring that forward within that culture, rather than trying to get them to switch cultures or switch or give up being a social justice person.
Yeah. Well, there's two aspects to it. One is you have sort of these mental models, and then the other is to empathize with everyone and to see where they're at. So there's kind of these two sort of ways of being, right? There's sort of this mental frameworks that we have, and we're analyzing, looking at, debating these models versus, not just versus, but people maybe switch between the two as well, to just be empathizing with everyone. And that's what we do. I see that too, but I guess I'm trying to look at the relationship between those two aspects, does that make sense?
It does. And I guess I'm also, the thing I'm thinking about is when people have a certain identity, and maybe it's an identity they've held for a long time, what does it take to get them to give up that identity and adopt another one, different one?
Yeah.
And a lot of people who try to work for change, that's their model, is I have something better, come adopt my model. And my experience is that it's much more difficult to get someone to give up something they identify with strongly, as opposed to understanding them and their culture and recognizing the portions of what I care about that exist in their culture, and trying to bring those forward, or trying to talk to them in their own language by talking about the parts of their culture that emphasize the things that I think are good to bring forward. And it doesn't have to be one or the other. It could be both. So both of those things could happen. We could develop a new model and say, look, this is a wonderful model, and talk about how it's effective. And some people could do that. And other people could go talk to people about their culture and get inside of it and talk about the parts of their culture that align with empathic culture of empathy values. But both of those strategies are good.
Yeah. Carolina?
When I'm listening to you, Bob, I hear two things. One is the process of embracing new vision, and that's what Louis is talking about. And the other thing is the vision. And what I believe is right is I like this idea of letting people not just drop their old outlook for a new one because it's difficult, then rather give them chance to evolve. I like this idea to find something that is connected to the culture of empathy in the present, current vision of life, outlook, whatever. And I believe it should be a part of our process. And it's very difficult because, well, it's a lot of work to do to find those germs of empathy in many different practices.
It's true.
A lot of work to do. And another thing is, which I was trying to point, and I'm not sure if it's clear. Maybe I can't find the right words to express what I mean, but don't get me wrong. I love to invent new things, new ideas. That's something I prefer to do, but I also feel like there is too many invention in this world, and nobody is practicing anything. Everybody tries to invent something new. For whom and for what? We need somebody who will use those inventions. For example, well, maybe it's not the best example, but I observe the situation within the movements I'm involved, among them XR. Every new project, and people try to find new platform of communication. On my telephone, I have so many applications and platforms to communicate with so many people that I don't remember to check all of them. And lately I found one of them with bunch of notifications that I didn't respond this, I didn't respond that. Sorry. This is crazy. Everybody try to find new, better form of communication. Sorry, we have to stop that. We have to start using what we already have. So in this context, I'm trying to imagine what we can do with culture of empathy. We can express, but I'm not sure if I want to invent something completely new.
You know, I don't know if you're done, but
Yeah.
it might not be so much as inventing something new, but articulating something that's out there already.
Yeah, that's what I
because
mean.
I see, because I would say it's sort of revealing what you're just sort of describing, the territory that's already there in that sense. Because, this basic quality of empathy, I mean, it's been there for forever in a sense, at a human level, at one level or another, as well as the power with, the sharing with, as
That's
well
the
as the
thing.
power over has been there for, the domination and so forth, and all the blocks, things that are blocking empathy is.
If I can, if
Yeah.
I may, that's the thing. But how we can show it, because that's what we need to achieve. If we model the culture of empathy, we also need to show anybody who would try to learn our vision. Everybody has to find point of references in his or her culture. I'm not sure if it's understandable what I'm saying.
Yeah, you're saying like trying to find a point of reference in a culture, like with the Afghans, they have the Loya Jirga where the men get together
Yeah.
and have these dialogues about issues. Native Americans maybe had their circles and that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
I also think that experience trumps theory, and that the most important thing is to get people into trying the practice and let them experience it. They can find, once they experience the value of it, they can make their own connections to their culture and how they might explain it to people in their own culture that don't necessarily understand it, and what cultural references they might draw on, or what language they might use to describe it to them, or but the idea of people talking to each other and actually hearing each other, listening to each other and hearing each other, that's what's new about it, is it's not practiced very much, but it's not what am I trying to say? It's not so alien to human experience that people won't understand it when they experience it.
But you just made very important point about the process. If we want to present this vision or the method to any culture, any community, we always should discuss about any references. We always should talk about any references to their culture, their tradition.
If you can, and if you can't, I mean, so I introduced, I'm doing Petaluma Conversations. I didn't call what we were doing empathy circles. I said what we're going to have is a structured listening process, and it has a few attributes to make sure that everyone has a chance to be heard and understood to their satisfaction. So, time, term taking, and I just call it a structured listening practice, and people do it and they like it. And then afterwards I say, so if you want to try this other places, here's a handout you can use, and the handout says empathy circle on it. So, that's how they get introduced to the idea, and they may choose not to call it that. If they choose to take it and try it with someone, they may call it something else, a listening circle or a listening session, or I just read a thing about Republicans. This is from the Better Angels argument or article, that conservatives don't want to sit in a circle, and they don't want to share. They just want to be heard, and they want to have a chance to make their arguments. So the Better Angels people, they don't use round tables, they use square tables. They make sure they have square tables so people aren't sitting in circles, and they don't use this, they don't say sharing, they don't use the term sharing. That's fine, so people sit together and they talk. I don't know what process they use, but and Petaluma Conversations is the same thing. I don't use the word sharing. We say speaking and reflecting, and we say and actually most of the times we have sat at square tables just because the tables happen to be square, but that so those are cultural things. So if you're recognizing that certain kinds of language people don't relate to, you don't use that language. You talk to them in the language that they are gonna.
Well, there's another aspect to the language, is you create meaning around the experience too. In terms of you know, by putting the empathy circle out there and then having people take part, it's like with my family, you know, it's like I talk about empathy all the time. I talk to them, it's like, we don't know what you're talking about, doesn't make any sense. I do that mediation, you know, and it kind of works. Everybody kind of ends up, and I say, this is the empathy, you know, it's like, oh, they made the association. So now they got a new vocabulary, and the vocabulary does make a lot of difference because there's this new academic study out there. I mean, out of the political, you know, University of Houston, they say that the empathy is leading to more polarization. And the idea is that you empathize with your in-group, you know, left or right, and that causes you, the deeper your connection with your in-group, the more polarized you become against the out-group. And then that gets picked up by, you know, Wired Magazine, Scientific America. There's like 3 or 4 articles now that take that study, and then they say, they have like, empathy causes disconnection, empathy is causing all this kind of stuff. So it's like you get into this whole rhetorical,
Right.
It's like a total mess. You don't know what people are talking about. There's no clear definition of what they're talking about. In fact, I wouldn't even say they're talking about empathy, because, you know, some academics decided, like, if I empathize with you, Lou, and you're very upset or you're in pain, then I'm going to empathize with you and I'm going to go into distress because, oh, I got to deal with Lou and all his problems. Now I feel all distressed and worry about it. And so instead of just calling that distress, let's call it empathic distress. So then it's empathic distress is, so that's what they're actually attacking, criticizing is empathic distress. And then everybody's reinterpreting that as, well, it's empathy that's so bad. It's like, it's just the person's distress. It's like, it's a total rhetorical, conceptual, you know, morass. Nobody knows what they're talking about. You know, nobody's using the same language with each other. And that's actually where an empathy circle kind of helps. After about an hour, 2 hours, you kind of work through, you know, all this rhetorical, you know, disconnection. You start kind of lining into, well, what is the person really talking about? And so anyway, it's just, there is something about having, and I kind of just see that if in the humanities, if they had the same, if in the medical field, they had the same, you know, naming mess that they have in, you know, surgery, I mean, people would be dying all over the place. You'd say, give me a scalpel, and they'd be handing them, you know, a saw or something, right? I mean, people would be dying all over the place, but in humanities, it doesn't matter. It's like part of the game. Let's it's like crazy.
Well, and I would say the most important thing is for people to experience empathy, not what they call it, not what they call it. So if I were going into a group of conservatives, I would say, let's have an honesty circle, or let's have some word that they would relate to and say, yes, I want to do that. And then you do the empathy process, the empathy circle process, and they experience actually hearing other people and connecting with them and feeling heard. So it's just as important that people actually feel heard, like that people are joining them empathically, and they have a chance to do that with it, and that they experience that. What you call it doesn't matter. Well, it's not that it doesn't matter at all, but it's, it doesn't matter whether we all agree that that's called empathy or not. What matters is that we experience that connection, that understanding, the bridging divides, you know, that we experience that, and that there might be different names for it. Some people might call that empathy, some people might call it truth or honesty, some people might call it other stuff. You know, there might be different names for it in different groups, but we're talking about the same thing.
Yeah, we're talking about the felt experience. Like the felt experience is the kind of the core of the right. It's what we're grounding it in, right? It's like we need to have that core experience and be talking about the same core experiences and to experience it. But then you got to it helps to have a name, because somebody's saying it's this is hate, and then somebody says, well, this is love, and somebody says this is empathy. And it creates a bit of, it does kind of help to have common language too.
Well, what about 200 definitions of empathy? What do you want to do? What do you want to do with that?
To me, whatever gets people to participate in the process and experience it and decide, oh, this is good, I think I'll do this more. To me, that's all that matters. Whatever language you have to use to describe it, to get people to try it, to help them understand what's happening, it's secondary, because people are going to describe it in different ways. It's kind of like, nonviolent communication. They have observations, feelings, needs, requests, and supposedly, if you acknowledge all of those, it's connecting and people, whatever. Well, but in practice, some people are triggered by having their feelings reflected. So if you say to them, I see, looks like you're feeling angry because of that. But no, I'm not feeling angry. You'll get into a big argument about what exactly they were feeling or what they would call it. And no, they weren't. And why? Because they don't like it. Their feelings are private. Their culture is that they don't express feelings, or they learned when they were young, feelings are not important. So they kind of deny their feelings. Fine. All I'm trying to do with the communication is create understanding. If reflecting your feelings makes you feel more understood and like I'm seeing you, great. If it creates disconnection for you because you don't want those acknowledged, that creates shame in you or something like that, fine, I'll stop reflecting those. I'll just go to the other elements, because that's what creates a connection.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I would say that sorry. Oh gosh.
That's painful. I hate that. Can't get sneeze out. It's like you get stuck with it. Feels so unsatisfied.
I think what you are trying to articulate, Edwin, and if it's what I think, I agree with that. We have to establish a common code of meanings, or common language we're using. And if I understand Edwin correctly, he means if you experience, we can name what you experience. And that's how we create a vocabulary. And during our circles, we create also a sort of grammar of empathy. And this is our language. That's what we're trying to do. It's sort of process we start to name. And that's how we create connection, but also mutual understanding. With kind of discovering how we understand the same things or similar things or close experiences, close feelings, close phenomena we are going through. All those processes that happen with us. And we need to name them so we understand that we talk about the same thing. And I would agree with that. I would agree that when we are trying to name some processes that happens to us and to establish the common language of it. If there are 200 of definitions, empathy definitions, we have to show which one is ours. So when somebody experiences something, what you experience is what we call empathy. And this is important element, what we call empathy. We name
Mhm.
it
Yeah.
empathy. We don't say this is empathy. We say we call
Uh-huh.
this experience empathy.
Yeah, one of the top researchers on empathy, a guy named Dan Batson, he's been working on this like 40 years, and what you're saying is the exact conclusion he came up with. He says he laid out the sort of the constellation of different how the word empathy is used. He, you know, traced it back to who kind of coined these terms. He says it's, you know, he just basically says it's sort of a morass. You don't know what people are talking about, but when you're discussing, you need to do exactly what you're saying, is say how you're using the word. So create your own definition of how you're using it and stay with it. And I think that's what it is. Like, this is how we are using the term, and you know, it gives a, you know, a starting point to sort of a, or I think some kind of clarity, you know.
Yeah. So for me, vision of empathy is kind of clarifying what we think, what we experience, and what we mean. That's what we're trying to do here. We try to clarify.
What we mean is is us
Yeah.
here having a discussion, like, what do we mean by you know, a culture of empathy? Yeah, I would agree with that. I don't know, Lou seems a little skeptical, but
Yeah, no, I think it, you know, what you're describing, that process of wanting to do that, that's fine to the degree that that produces clarity for what we're doing, you know, for people who are part of this group or part of this practice. To, you know, creating clarity is a great thing. Um, so yeah, so I'm in supportive of it. I don't, you know, the idea whether everyone will adopt it or everyone will,
Yeah.
you know, I don't know the answer to that. So then it doesn't really matter. I
it
mean,
does exactly.
what I'm hearing is a desire in this group to do this, to create more clarity and to create so that we can make statements. And I think it's a great thing to do. I think
Yeah, and that's part of the articulating
sure.
for our own clarity. We're not saying this is the way it is. This is just a terminology we use.
Absolutely.
And the more support there is around, you know, creating a higher fidelity of that understanding, I think that is helpful too. It's just like making it a little bit sharper, a little clearer, easier to understand what we mean by it. And it's not the ultimate truth, and anyone can kind of use their own definition.
Yeah.
But this is just what we're meaning by it. And we're glad to dialogue with you about what it means to you and hear what how you're meaning it. And we'd love to have an empathic dialogue to really empathize with you and about what it means for you in that.
Yes.
Yeah, and I'm realizing part of the reason I was motivated or had the instinct to create the statement of purpose and the principles for Petaluma Conversations, to give those to facilitators, was trying to make a clear statement about why we are doing this and what are the guidelines that we're following, and the idea of having those read at the beginning of each circle or at the beginning of each meeting where we get together is just kind of established. This is what we're about and this is what we're trying to do. So it's the same kind of thing.
Okay, so we have.
So I don't know if you guys have seen the things I posted in the chat. I guess maybe you had the document. I should have posted them in there. But there are 2 paragraphs there. And then I had the word innovation, which kind of got sucked up on the bottom of the second paragraph. And not only one approach, use all approaches. So, you know, the first paragraph I wrote before we got on, and the second paragraph I wrote in response to some of the conversation we were having.
Can you read that? Because, you know, listening to you and reading is kind of difficult. We can't, our brains don't process that.
I'll stop talking so you can read it.
Okay.
So I copied it into the Google Doc
Okay,
too.
that's
It's
good.
still on page
That's good.
1, bottom of page 1. So I was reading in the definition.
And I think we can all edit, as I remember. You wanted us to write some paragraphs after the meeting,
Yeah.
as I remember. So we can still work on it.
So last time at the last meeting, we went over the website. There's a website here, you know, for just kind of organizing this material. I just put the link in, Lou.
Right.
And do you have a? See, I can. Let me just share that real quick here. So this was the site. I'm just putting it in there, and I had just given. Let's see if you can. Oh, yeah, so Gmail. So I'm just adding you too as an admin, and William Filler.
Better Gmail. You did better to add him as Gmail.
Yeah, he's got multiple emails, so I don't know.
Yeah, but Gmail is better for this sort of site. Gmail is better.
It is, but well, I guess I can do multiple. Let me do William. Is you have to be logged on in the account when it, but so I guess just so anyway, you should be able to edit it too.
Yeah,
and,
looking at it.
Yes. So at the beginning, there's a Google Doc. What is that? No, it's not the one. It's the what is. If you go to what is, we've been.
I think this is the fragment we don't have to record. It's waste of time to record this. You can pause.
Yeah. So, and that was what the website was to start structuring, you know, what we come up with and give it some form. So we know where everything is, because it starts generating a lot of things that just don't, you know, get kind of lost.
Maybe one way to do it would be if we agree that our goal is to come up with a vision statement and a set of principles, that we create 2 places in the document. One says vision statement, one says principles, and then we go in and add stuff to that. Whatever. So the vision statement could start with just each of us brainstorming the attributes of a culture of empathy, like the one that I did, you know, and we just do as many as we want, as many as we can think of, and then we get together and review those. We read them and we think, well, these 2 are redundant, you know, or whatever. Do we think it's complete? Do we think it's clear? Does it need editing? You know, and the same with the principles, and that would eventually produce those 2 things. I think, and maybe if we think we need to come up with more than that, then we're having an initial discussion about that. What is it that we're trying to come up with? Is it more than a vision statement and a statement of principles?
Okay, I like that. It's a starting point, and you know, we can have a page that says vision statement and a page that says principles, and we start just filling that in, come up with like a vision statement of like a paragraph or something, or a couple of paragraphs, or and then sort of individual principles of.
What do you understand by statement? I understand the word, but still I'm not sure what you mean by that.
So in my view, a vision statement would be a statement of what a culture of empathy would look like. What What are we hoping for?
I have no idea
Okay.
what the culture of empathy should look like.
Okay.
And I believe it is dangerous to create the. It sounds like we want like an image of something, a system.
Well, what do you think of like the first paragraph that I wrote? Is
Uh,
that something that you would like to see happen? Would you like the word?
I have to read that after the meeting in kind of calm situation. I can't focus
Okay.
right now on it. I'm afraid of static feature of this definition. And what was your suggestion? One is a statement, and the other are a set of principles. Yeah, it's very static.
Okay.
Something I'm not sure what it is, but I'm afraid of it.
What would you like to see?
I don't know yet. Something I feel like there's. I don't want to say something wrong, but something that bothers me. I'm not sure. I think it should be process. It never-ending process. It can't be ready and permanent. It has to be something that can be changed.
Okay. So it sounds like that's part of your vision of a culture of empathy, is that
Yeah.
a culture of empathy does rely on one process, that it changes and evolves, and it's not one thing.
It has to be dynamic. It has to be
dynamic. Right?
Yeah. I'm afraid of building something that is not ultimate. How to say that in English? Oh gosh. Permanent. I mean, constant, unchangeable. It has to be changeable.
Okay. And I assume you're meaning in its practices, not in its purpose or its values.
I'm not sure what. Can you repeat that? Probably I didn't understand you.
In other words, that it's not fixed in its practices or the way it pursues a culture of empathy, but that its purpose and its values are steady. Maybe not completely fixed, but steady.
Okay, yeah. Values and principles might be steady, but the culture is practice. That's what you mean.
Right, to the degree that culture is expressed in practices, norms, rituals, yes.
Okay. Okay. And what is important to me, it's not a state of society. It's a process of society.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And we can choose what kind of dynamics it is. Is it violent or it is empathic? Yeah, for me, empathy talking empathic dynamic of society is something opposite to violent dynamics, okay? Because as you said, culture is oppressive.
Can be.
Always. Well, always. It's a immanent part of culture, okay? If we have some set of values and to be together in one community, we have to sort of obey those values. It is sort of oppression. I have to accept something I might not agree fully. Okay? If I compromise my freedom, in some point it might be hypocrisy, it might be slavery, it might be different things. But to some point, to some degree, we have to accept something that is not fully us. And this is a sort of oppression. But we can deal with it in different way. It might be violent, it might be aggressive, harmful, and it might be dialogue, deliberative. With mutual understanding and making, I don't know, compromising, but in the positive meaning, compromising. Because that's what community is. We agree that we have to accept our needs and sometimes leave our wishes for our will. We sometimes have to put willingness before our wishes. I don't know if it's clear.
And I would call that a willingness to hold our own desires and other people's desires who may have a different view than us together at the same time.
Yeah, yeah.
So that would be a principle, wouldn't it? Like a principle to hold our own and other people's desires.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just oops.
I feel like I'm mumbling, but somehow you find sense in what I'm saying.
Lou's good at that.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, my experience is these are basic human truths. You know, people want to be understood. They want their needs and desires to be understood, and they want to try to realize them, fulfill them. And that sometimes that creates conflict because not everybody has the same needs at the same moment.
Yeah.
And also the desire for individuality and freedom of choice makes it so that even if you have a good idea and you've described it very accurately and it's all like makes a lot of sense and it's correct, I might say, well, I don't agree with it just because I want to be contrary, or I want to explore a different way of thinking it, or I want to call it something else, or people's desire for innovation, creativity, difference, lack of boredom, lack of uniformity. People want to create something else. Someone could create a beautiful way of dressing, and someone says, well, I'm going to create my own fashion because I want to dress a different way. I want to experiment with looking some other way. I think that's just natural. That's part of human innovation and human creativity. And it's part of the reason why it's never going to be the case that everybody accepts one thing. I don't think that's ever been true in human history. I mean, I don't know human history, Aurora, but when I look at what I do know of human history, you know, nobody ever accepts, everyone accepts one thing.
And I don't think we want it.
No.
We just want to communicate those different perspectives.
Correct. Right, to recognize the common thing. So all the different forms of fashion have their own kind of beauty. And if you can recognize that, you can see beauty in all of it and not say that one is beautiful and the other is not, you know.
But you know, sometimes we have situations on conflict where somebody's needs, fulfilling somebody's needs, leaves other people's needs unfulfilled. And this is the real conflict.
Yeah.
And we have to find a way to deal with such a conflict in possibly non-violent way.
Yes.
It's real contradiction. It's real situation, or a real issue. And I would like to find the process for such a conflict too. It's not just different way of dealing with the same thing and everybody can choose what he or she likes. It's a real situation where somebody gets their needs fulfilled and the other person doesn't. And what to do with that.
And part of that, sometimes the resolution of that conflict has to do with people actually coming to understand what needs they are trying to fulfill more clearly. Sometimes people actually don't understand that well what needs they're trying to meet. They are doing a certain thing and they think that that thing is fulfilling a certain need, but actually when you look at it carefully and calmly, it's not actually meeting that need very much. Or there might be a different thing that would meet the same need. They wouldn't be in conflict with the other person. That's why NVC says a lot of times the conflict is at the level of the strategy that's used to meet the need. That's where there's a conflict. There's no conflict in the underlying need. But other times it is true that people, you know, like we have an evening. My wife and I, we have an evening to do something. I have a desire to play. She has a desire to what? Something else. A desire to work. Well, that's not a need. I mean, work is a strategy to meet a certain need. I have a desire to make a contribution to a group that she cares about. Okay? And my desire to play doesn't meet up with that. My desire to play, I want to go, you know, but doing the work of that group isn't play to me. That isn't how I experience play. So we have two different needs. So how do we resolve that conflict? Well, we could each go do our own thing and not be together. Or I could try to reframe, I could try to find some playful way to engage in the work that she wants to do. Or she could decide, I also have a need to play. I'm going to set aside my need to work right now, and I'm going to join in my need to play. I'm going to shift something. Those are all possible solutions to that problem. If we really understand what's going on in us and what our desires are. If we are not doing that, if we're kind of unconscious and she just says to me, oh, you're not a very serious person, you're just always goofing off, and you don't care about what I'm doing. I'm trying to do something important, and you don't have any respect for what I do. So I am pissed off at you. So there's a lot of other needs going on in there that are not being consciously addressed. You know, and I could have the same judgments of her, different kinds of judgments. You know, so anyway.
So it's kind of like saying a principle of life is conflict is a never-ending and ongoing quality of life. I mean, there's always, we can kind of make, from my experience, my physical experience, conflict is a never-ending, ongoing quality of life, and you move from one to the other, kind of work through it. And there's not only the conflict of needs, or feelings that we desire between people. It's like there's that whole motivational interviewing process of working through conflicts within ourselves, right? It's like someone is addicted to drugs, and it's like, hey, I get a really good feeling, my pain is for a while covered, over, solved by dealing with these drugs. But I also have a desire for greater connection with my family, and I see that I'm inhibiting connection with my family. So I'm kind of like struggling between these two, these two different values. And it's with the empathy, it's like hearing both sides, that with motivational interviewing, you're hearing both sides, and you're giving sort of like voice to the exploration of those needs and motivations, to the point where you can you kind of get energy for going maybe in a new constructive direction, right? And you need sort of that support from others it helps. I mean, so anyway, I guess I'm just saying that it's the conflict, the internal and external interpersonal conflict is not, so there's the empathy. The quality of empathy is, for me, the feeling into the experiences, and sort of giving voice to the qualities and natures of the experience. And there's sort of an integrative process that happens. Somehow these different energies kind of get integrated and get sort of like resolved. They get harmonized or synchronized, or something. There's sort of and it's like creating a culture, having a culture. I mean, it's just families seem to work better when there's, and relationships work better when there's sort of this space given for this empathic hearing of sort of the truths of our experience.
So you are talking, Edwin, about the process of dealing with conflict, but it seems to me that we also have to name conflicts that happens to us, conflicts that are immanent part of social life and personal life. As you describe it, that we have conflict, inner conflict, we have, so to speak, outer conflict, we have conflict between people, we have conflict between different groups, we have, I'm just, thinking aloud now, we have conflict between person and the system, and groups, social groups and the system. We have international conflicts. So there are those conflicts, we can perceive them as a real argument, or just contradiction between needs that has to be fulfilled. And contradiction, I don't know if contradiction is the right word, but I use it anyway. I'm not sure if it's the thing I mean. Contradiction between different needs, but also contradiction with what I assume is my need, but it's not the real need I'm trying to fulfill. And it might be conflict between my own needs. So there is enormous architecture of everything we call conflict. But
has many dimensions. So there's multi-dimensions of what conflict is, many different levels.
And one thing I would agree, I'm not I'm not using word conflict in a sense of war, argument. No, I'm using the word conflict in a sense, in a meaning of contradiction. Contradiction, we call it? Contradiction.
Well,
between different things. And that what might create empathic process or war. I'm using extremities.
Yeah, so war,
And
right, war is one strategy for trying to resolve conflict,
yeah, yeah.
and empathy is another strategy for trying to
Yeah,
resolve.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, and that's what we are, and we are trying to create the model, the vision of dealing with those conflicts that are immanent part of our life.
Yeah, there's also the aspect, wouldn't make it all about conflict, because that's a bit what I was seeing in your definition, Lou, is there's also the quality of not being in conflict. It's like the so-called when the needs are being met, right? There's a certain
Yeah,
there's a certain quality of life when needs, or when we're not in conflict, when we're in sort of in harmony, in connection, in sort of a flow. So it's good
that's interesting.
to incorporate both of those, or unless you're thinking that life is always conflict, there's
No, no,
no
no, I
end to
like it.
conflict, that
I like
there's,
it.
well, getting empathy for things that are going well is also important and feels good.
yeah.
So, but I think that yeah, so those both have value. Not, I was going to say conflict is what people struggle with more, but it's also true that people getting actually deep empathic connection around things that are going right is also something that doesn't happen.
Well, I would say that conflicts, maybe it's not the good comparison, but it's like raisins in a pasta, we have a huge tissue of harmony, and inside that there are moments when we lose this harmony. That's what our life is. If our life was uh, only built from the conflicts, it would be unbearable. And well, probably there are people for whom life is unbearable because their life consists mostly of conflicts, and there is no this part of harmony. And the thing is the balance to
Yeah, and there I might differentiate between conflict and violence. So
yeah, yeah, yeah,
people say, conflict is inevitable, violence is not. So
yeah,
you're going to have conflict in your life,
Hmm.
but you don't
yeah,
have to
yeah,
have violence. There are other ways of resolving the conflict that don't
yeah,
result in violence.
Yeah,
And I,
like oh,
and I would say even people's attitude about conflict. So some people experience a lot of pain just because they experience any kind of conflict, like just because there's a disagreement, someone wants to do something else, has a different opinion or a different way of thinking. Some people experience that with a lot of pain.
yeah,
It's like they don't get a lot of agreement, or yeah, people are not. Someone's expressing a different opinion, like they're ruining everything, because they're expressing a different opinion. Instead of, I guess, if they had more confidence that
yeah.
differences could be resolved and we can find things, then they wouldn't be so afraid of it, or it wouldn't create so much pain for them. But some people have an expectation that um, everybody's just going to agree on everything, and
Yeah,
you know
that's impossible.
yeah.
Yeah, but I think that having this harmony experience is very important. What Edwin pointed, it's very important. If experience of conflict dominates in our life, it might be unbearable.
Certainly
And
conflict that ends in some kind of violence, whether that's physical violence or people just treating each other badly or not
mm,
understanding each other, having judgments of each other, which you could call that a form of violence. If somebody you express a difference, and instead of trying to understand what you are saying, someone just comes at you with a lot of judgment.
yeah, I understand your point about violence, but I mean also the situation when somebody experience a dominate might be in quite a peaceful environment, but still feel domination of distress, sort of, you know, and domination of, even in a very peaceful environment, social environment, you might feel that you might feel under stress, enormous stress.
Yeah,
And
so if you're feeling dominated or under a lot of stress, then you're not feeling very understood and seen, I'm guessing.
well, I'm talking about my own experience, because my situation is kind of peaceful situation.
Mhm.
I don't experience a lot of quarrel, kind of conflicts. I don't have it, and I still, my needs are not fulfilled almost at all, and I live in an enormous stress. And it is because my needs are not fulfilled. And it's kind of objective situation, okay? I understand why it's happening, but I still feel this distress, enormous distress. So it is sort of conflict I experience without any argument or quarrel or whatever, you know. There is no such thing. I find even a lot of understanding when I talk to you. I find a lot of understanding of my situation, but still I feel it because it's objective lack of fulfillment.
So there, the conflict is between the desires that you have, whatever those desires are, and the society, the city, the neighborhood, the country, the world that you live in.
Yeah, the system I live, yeah, the obstacles,
Yeah,
economic obstacles. There's a lot of things, you know. It's more systemic than, you know, it's not somebody's will, bad will or something, okay? There is no such thing in it. It's just sort of objective
Yeah. Well, there's the
situation.
aspect of our felt experience. I think that's sort of the core of it is
Yeah.
you have a felt experience of anxiety or distress or
Yeah,
tension,
yeah,
and sort of you know, I've got my felt experience and Lou has his felt experience. So we all have these felt experiences. Like I have a little felt experience, like seeing we're almost going for 2 hours and a conflict with time, for example. So I want to keep us on time, but yet I'm enjoying the discussion. So I have a feeling, oh, let's keep the dialogue exploration going, but also, you know, wanting to close just for the other things that need to
yeah,
deal with. And um, but- so I'm good with, you know, slowly kind of wrapping up, and
yeah.
maybe in terms of sort of next steps is, you know, writing up some of these and just a simple, you know, add, and then maybe share it next week. And
I just wanted to say one more thing. So the last thing you described, Carolina, I would describe as could be a conflict between something you believe about the way the world should be and the way you perceive it is. That could be the
Yeah, that's interesting. That's also interesting point. Yeah, very interesting what you said.
yeah, so looking at all again, that whole what would you say about the types of conflict? There seems to be so many different sort of types of conflicts,
Yeah,
but each of those conflicts has a felt experience. I think that's the part I'm really wanting to address is you know, empathy is in feeling. So feeling is like the core part of it. And so I think in terms of a vision, it's sort of a real sensitivity to the felt experience that we have too. So there's different types of conflict, but each of those conflicts has felt experience, a felt experience to it. there's something about being able to share that felt experience with others that for me is kind of, I don't know if it's healing or it creates another felt experience. Sharing my felt experience creates the felt experience of connection and kind of like warmth and sort of a bubbly, bubbliness in my body, and I enjoy that quality and yeah.
And I would argue that felt experience is composed of both feelings and meaning. That it has both of those components. That when I feel like I am really connected or having an empathic understanding of another person, I'm understanding both, actually three things, kind of what the situation is, how they feel about it, and what meaning it has for them.
That's interesting, feeling and meaning.
So you're saying that the feeling has a meaning to it. It has so the feeling is connected to other feelings. In a sense. Would that be another way of saying it?
No,
No.
I'm saying that so the feeling. So I might feel upset. I might feel angry, sad, happy, scared, some sort of emotion. But understanding me fully, if I'm in distress or I'm wanting to be understood, understanding me fully isn't just understanding the emotion that I'm feeling. It's also understanding the situation I'm in and why it's important to me, why it matters to me. Meaning, in other words, what is the meaning of it to me? To me, that's empathy. Those are the things I'm listening for.
Uh-huh.
Trying to really connect with someone and trying to let them know that I think I understand where they are. Those are the things I try to reflect to them.
So it sounds like it might be a contradiction between feelings and meaning.
Not contradiction. I'm saying those are elements of empathy for me.
And do you mean by meaning the needs that are behind that feeling? Like it's like
the desires, the wishes, the hopes, the values. You could call those needs. Those are a bunch of different words that I use.
I am curious about what the meaning, like I don't have I mean I use the term, but I don't have a visceral sense of meaning.
For me,
right?
it was explanation. Meaning was explanation for me. And
except it's not.
I believe, let me just end the sentence. Meaning is the explanation, and I experience contradiction between my feeling and explanation of the situation, and it's not the problem for me. I accept that. It's okay for me. Very often experience this contradiction between how I understand the situation and how I feel about it. It's kind of daily experience for me. And I feel like I feel my explanation. I feel my thoughts. I have very deep feeling experience of what I think. I don't, for example, this is the problem I had with Professor Nagler, with Michael Nagler and Stephanie Van Hook and their team. They say about body, spirit, and mind. I don't split those three things. For me, it's one. And I don't split my feeling and my thoughts. They are one for me.
Yeah, I come down on that too. That's how there's the quality that meaning, the notion of meaning has a felt experience.
Yes.
Like when you say meaning, what is the felt experience? And I had thought of doing something like, what is the feeling of reason, for example, right? It's like reason is seen as this thing that is separate, is a separate thing, but I would say that the reason, I mean, we can go on quite a while with that, I don't want to give us but that the reason has a felt experience associated with it, and so a sensitivity to the reason. I think, and it's even like in terms of thoughts. When I'm thinking, I can sense where in my body the thinking is happening. You know what?
Yeah.
It can shift. So having that sensory awareness of, I mean, it's a quality of my experience is that all these different qualities have felt qualities to it, that they're not like separate somehow.
Yeah,
I think that's
agree.
really quite important, because it kind of with this distinction between feeling and, you know, reason, that I think it's not.
I don't like it.
I don't think. I think that has a real problem with reality in a sense.
I think actually in this discussion, your discussion, Edwin, with Wall, there was this moment you were talking about the era of reason and kind of separating our empathy from reason, and there was this part of your discussion. I like it because I deeply agree with that. But I would go even further. It's, well, part of feelings are emotions for me, and I have emotional attitude to my thoughts, very emotional. Yes, I have emotional attitude to my thoughts, to ideas.
Could you give me an example of a thought that you have a lot of emotion about?
To everything.
Or just give me an example of one.
If I like them or I don't like them, if I have doubts about them or not, doubt, liking or not liking, agreeing or disagreeing is emotional for me. If I say this idea is beautiful, it's emotional. Mathematicians very often says, "Oh, this is beautiful theory." Scientists who deal with physics,
Physicists,
physicists. They say, "Oh, this is beautiful theory." That's emotional.
Yes. So this is a really interesting conversation, and I would actually like to continue it, because I
have to go.
I'm hearing a difference in the way that a possible difference in the way that I think about it than the way the two of you think about it. I suspect that there isn't actually a difference, but it probably would take a while to tease it out, and I don't have a while now.
Either do I. I need to do some things too. So, but this is great.
But for instance, I would say when the mathematician says that's a beautiful theory,